My name is Walter Hayes. I turned 70 last night, though you wouldn't have known it by the way my family treated the evening. We sat at a long wooden table in the middle of Willow Creek Steakhouse, a place I've been taking them to for years. Balloons floated in the corner, my granddaughter giggled, and waiters carried platters of food. I smiled, tried to soak in the laughter. Then, out of nowhere, a man in a black vest leaned close to me. He slipped a folded napkin-sized paper by my glass of wine. I thought it was the check until I opened it. 4 words in shaky handwriting, "Don't drink that." My heart thudded. The stem of my glass trembled between my fingers. Everyone else was too busy laughing at my son-in-law's jokes to notice. In that moment, the world froze around me, and every instinct I had screamed, something was very, very wrong. I didn't think. I acted. Slowly, pretending to fumble with my napkin, I swapped my glass with the one in front of my son-in-law, Derek. He didn't notice. He was too busy slapping the table, telling my daughter Meredith another crude story about his old college days. My hand shook as I pushed my glass, now his, closer to him. He raised it, clinked it against mine, and took a big swallow. I stared. The note burned in my pocket. My throat felt dry as bone. Minutes crawled like hours. My family's laughter sounded hollow in my ears, every cheer like a drumbeat of doom. Then, 20 minutes later, Derek's voice cracked mid-laugh. He coughed, clutched his throat, and his face drained of color. My daughter screamed. My grandson dropped his fork. I just sat there, frozen in horror and dread. "Dad, do something!" Meredith shrieked, as Derek toppled from his chair, knocking his plate of prime rib onto the carpet. The restaurant erupted into chaos. Waiters rushed forward. People stood and gasped. A woman shouted for someone to call 911. But me, I was glued to my seat. I stared at Derek convulsing on the floor, his hands clawing at his chest, his eyes bulging in panic. And all I could think about was that note. Don't drink that. Who wrote it? Who was it meant for? Him or me? My granddaughter clung to my arm, sobbing into my sleeve. I placed a trembling hand on her head, but inside, a storm raged. If that wine was poisoned, then my life had just been spared by seconds. As the paramedics stormed in, Meredith fell to her knees beside Derek, screaming his name. I saw her hands trembling as she tried to shake him back to life. But Derek's lips had already turned blue. The crowd pressed closer. I felt eyes on me, accusing, questioning, whispering. A waiter muttered something about switching glasses. My mind spun in panic. Did anyone see me? Did anyone notice that I had handed him my drink? My whole body pulsed with fear and guilt. I had acted on instinct, but now Derek lay unconscious, maybe dying, and the secret of that note burned hotter than fire in my chest. Around me, my family's trust felt like glass shattering in slow motion. "Sir, what happened here?" a police officer asked, pulling me aside as they cleared the scene. His voice was sharp, his eyes trained on me like a hawk. "Did you see anything suspicious?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My daughter looked up, her face streaked with tears. Her eyes landed on me, filled with confusion, maybe even suspicion. I felt something shift in her gaze, like a door closing between us. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to shout about the note. But a cold voice in my head stopped me. "If you say anything, Walter, they'll think you knew. They'll think you planned this." So I swallowed my truth and shook my head. "No, officer," I croaked. "Just a normal dinner." The steakhouse emptied into the cold night air. Flashing red lights painted the parking lot, and my family huddled together. I stood apart, shivering, though it wasn't from the autumn breeze. My grandson clung to his mother, asking where Daddy went. Meredith didn't answer. She only glared at me, silent, like she knew something I didn't. My oldest son, Greg, put a hand on her shoulder, but even he avoided my eyes. That silence was worse than any scream. It was judgment. It was doubt. And for the first time in 70 years, I felt like a stranger among my own blood. My heart cracked at the thought. I'd sacrificed everything for them, every last piece of myself, and now they looked at me as though I was the enemy. Later that night, I sat alone on my porch swing. The police had taken statements, the ambulance had carried Derek away, and my family had gone home in a fog of fear and anger. I lit a cigarette, my first in 30 years, and stared into the dark. My hands still shook from the memory of that folded note. Who would want me dead? And why? I thought of the decades I had given, the long nights at the factory, the pension that barely stretched, the mortgage I paid so my daughter could live worry-free, the cars, the tuition, the endless sacrifices. And yet, in the end, someone at that very table had wanted to see me gone. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. My chest tightened until I thought my heart might burst. The next morning, Meredith called. Her voice was sharp, brittle. "Dad," she said, "the doctors think it was poisoning. They're running tests. Derek's stable, but—" She paused, and the silence between us screamed louder than words. "The police want to talk again. They think maybe it wasn't random." I tried to ask what she meant, but she cut me off. "You switched drinks last night, didn't you? I saw you. Why would you do that?" Her voice cracked. My throat closed. She hung up before I could answer. I sat there, phone heavy in my hand, realizing the truth. In their eyes, I wasn't the victim. I was the suspect. My own daughter believed I had poisoned her husband. And nothing I could say would erase the memory of what she thought she saw. That afternoon, Greg came over. He stood in my kitchen, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes avoiding mine. "Dad," he muttered, "if there's something you need to tell us, now's the time. Meredith's a mess. She thinks you tried to, you know. I told her you wouldn't, but—" His voice trailed off. He couldn't even finish the sentence. I looked at my son, this man I had raised, clothed, fed, sacrificed everything for, and I saw the doubt in his eyes, the hesitation, the quiet distance. It broke something inside me. My own flesh and blood, weighing whether I could be a murderer. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand he remember every Christmas I worked double shifts so he could have gifts. But instead, I just nodded. "I didn't hurt him," I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew he wasn't sure. By nightfall, I was alone again. The house felt colder than usual, every shadow stretching long across the walls. I sat in my recliner, staring at the note on the coffee table. "Don't drink that." For words that had changed everything. My daughter didn't trust me. My son doubted me. And someone, somewhere, wanted me dead. My hands clenched into fists. For decades I had carried this family, built their lives on my back, and endured their quiet dismissals and disrespect. They thought I was just an old man, fragile and finished. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know the years had sharpened me, not broken me. They didn't know the secrets I still carried. As I stared at that note, one thought crystallized in my mind. Whoever tried to bury me had no idea who they were dealing with. I sat in my recliner that night, the note still burning on the coffee table, and my mind drifted backward through the years like a film I couldn't stop. People only saw an old man now, wrinkled hands, stiff knees, thinning hair. But I hadn't always been like this. Once I was strong, proud, steady as stone. I was the man everyone leaned on, the man who never said no, the man who carried the weight of an entire family on his shoulders without complaint. They didn't remember the nights I came home covered in grease from the factory, dog-tired but still reading bedtime stories to my kids. They didn't remember how many times I skipped new boots so they could have new sneakers. I remembered, though. Every sacrifice etched itself into me like a scar, and now those scars were all I had left. I was 21 when I married Elaine. God, she was radiant, fiery red hair, quick wit, eyes that could soften a storm. We started with nothing but a rented apartment and an old pickup that barely ran. I worked at the steel mill during the day, then picked up odd jobs at night. She stayed home with the kids, sewing clothes, stretching every dollar. We didn't complain, we dreamed. We dreamed of owning a house, sending the kids to college, building a life better than the one we were handed. And somehow we did it. Every spare dollar went to the mortgage. Every promotion I earned went to the kids' tuition funds. When the factory closed in the late 90s, I didn't break, I adapted. I started a small repair business out of our garage. Folks around town respected me for it. They knew Walter Hayes as dependable, honest, and too stubborn to quit. But the years weren't kind. Elaine got sick in her 50s, cancer. We fought it together, every appointment, every bill, every sleepless night by her hospital bed. Insurance barely covered anything, and I drained our savings to keep her alive. I would have sold my soul if it bought her one more day. When she finally slipped away, I held her hand until it went cold. That night she whispered something I've never forgotten. "Stay humble, Walter. Don't let money or bitterness change you. Your strength is in your heart, not your fists." I've lived by those words, even when life tried to grind me down. Even when my own children began to treat me like a relic of the past, I kept giving, kept forgiving, because that's what Elaine would have wanted. What they never knew, what no one knew, was that the little repair business grew. Slowly, quietly, year after year. I saved every penny after Elaine passed. I invested in properties, rental homes, a small strip mall, even a stake in the local hardware store. I never boasted, never flaunted. My old truck and faded jeans fooled everyone. To my children, I was just the tired old man living off a pension. They didn't realize I owned half the town's storefronts. They didn't realize I had more money tucked away than they could imagine. I never told them because I wanted them to build their own lives, not circle me like vultures. I thought I was protecting them from greed. But maybe I was just setting myself up for betrayal. My children grew up different than I hoped. Meredith married Derek against my advice. I saw the arrogance in his eyes from the start. He never liked me, said I was old-fashioned, too blunt, too stubborn. But I swallowed it for my daughter's happiness. Greg, my eldest, took after me in some ways, but even he drifted. He worked in tech, made good money, but every holiday he found a way to remind me how outdated I was. "Dad, nobody uses checkbooks anymore," he'd laugh. Or, "You should sell that old place and move into a retirement community." They thought I was weak, behind, a burden. They forgot who paid for their braces, their college, their weddings. They forgot who stood in the rain fixing their cars so they could make it to work. I never forgot. There were moments, quiet moments, when I'd sit in my study and think about telling them the truth. I imagined gathering them around the table and revealing the accounts, the deeds, the investments. I imagined their shocked faces, their apologies, their sudden respect. But Elaine's voice always stopped me. "Stay humble, Walter." So I kept the secret locked away. I wore the mask of a tired old man while I built a quiet empire no one knew about. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was foolishness, but I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I had. And now, as I stared at that poisoned wine glass in my memory, I wondered if my silence had given someone the motive to want me gone. The truth is, I've always known people underestimated me. At the mill, they said I'd never make foreman, but I did. When the business started, folks said it'd fold in 6 months, but it didn't. Even my own children underestimated me, thinking I'd go quietly into old age, grateful for scraps of attention. But I am not weak. I am not finished. I am Walter Hayes, a man who has fought every storm life ever threw at him. And if someone thinks they can bury me, they've picked the wrong man. Sitting in that recliner, with the weight of betrayal heavy on my chest, I felt something I hadn't in years, a fire in my gut. It was the same fire that built my life from nothing. It was back, and it was hungry. I remembered the last birthday I spent with Elaine. She had surprised me with a homemade cake, even though she was sick then. We sat at the kitchen table, just the two of us, and she looked me in the eye. "Walter," she said softly, "one day they're going to test you. Maybe not with work, maybe not with money, but with love and loyalty. Promise me you'll stand tall." I promised her, and now I realized this was that day. The test had come. My family suspected me of trying to kill Derek. Someone had tried to kill me. The truth sat tangled like a knot of barbed wire, but one thing was clear. I could not sit back and hope this storm passed. If I did, I'd lose everything. Not just my life, but my dignity, my family, and Elaine's memory. So I sat up straight, crushed out my cigarette, and picked up the note again. "Don't drink that." I studied the handwriting, shaky, rushed, maybe from an older hand. Someone had tried to warn me. Someone in that room didn't want me dead. But who? And why not just speak aloud? The questions churned, but instead of fear, I felt resolve. For 70 years I had been the man who gave everything. Now, for the first time, I would take something back, the truth. I would dig, I would pry, I would uncover every secret this family tried to hide. Because one thing was certain, if I didn't find out who tried to kill me, they would try again. And next time, I might not get a warning. As I laid the note back down, I thought about my children, my grandchildren, the legacy I had built. They believed I was weak, but they were about to see the truth. They were about to see what decades of sacrifice, pain, and quiet strength had forged. I had no idea then how twisted the path ahead would become, how much betrayal I would uncover, or how close I would come to losing everything. All I knew in that moment was this: my years of sacrifice were about to be tested in ways I never imagined. The days after Derek's poisoning were a blur of whispers, phone calls, and cold shoulders. Derek survived, though the doctors said it was close. Meredith stayed at the hospital night and day, barely answering my calls. When she did, her voice was sharp, clipped, as though every word she gave me was borrowed against a debt she didn't want to pay. "Dad," she said once, "the police still have questions. They're looking at everyone, but just stay put, okay? Stay put." Like I was a child who couldn't be trusted to tie his own shoes. I hung up the phone, staring at my own reflection in the kitchen window. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of being unwanted by the very people I had built my life around. It was like the walls of my own home had turned against me. Sunday dinner was the breaking point. Greg invited me, reluctantly, after Meredith insisted I come so the grandkids wouldn't worry. I brought a casserole, the same recipe Elaine used to make. But when I walked through the door, the air turned icy. Meredith wouldn't meet my eyes. Derek sat in a recliner, pale but smirking, his arm in a sling for dramatic effect even though nothing was broken. The kids hugged me, innocent and warm, but the adults were another story. Greg asked me questions that felt rehearsed. "So, Dad, you didn't notice anything strange that night? You didn't see anyone near the drinks?" His eyes were too sharp, his smile too thin. It wasn't curiosity, it was suspicion dressed up in politeness. I answered quietly, "No, son, I didn't." But inside, I wanted to slam my fist on the table and shout, "I saved his life, you fools!" Derek played the victim like he was born for it. He coughed at the table, exaggerated every wince, let Meredith cut his meat for him like a child. "You know," he said loudly, "I still don't understand why Dad switched our glasses that night. Seemed odd." He glanced at me, his eyes gleaming with a challenge. My fork froze midair. Meredith's hand tightened on his arm. Greg shifted uncomfortably, but no one defended me. My daughter's loyalty belonged to her husband, not her father. And in that silence, Derek's smirk widened. He was painting me as unstable, suspicious, maybe even dangerous, and no one stopped him. Every bite of food tasted like ash in my mouth. Over the next week, the calls stopped coming. No check-ins, no visits. I heard from neighbors before I heard from my own children. One morning, Mrs. Ellis from next door stopped me on the porch. "Walter," she whispered, "I heard some talk. Folks are saying maybe you had something to do with that poisoning." My stomach dropped. Gossip had spread faster than fire in dry grass. In a small town like Willow Creek, rumors had sharp teeth. I forced a smile, waved her off, but inside I felt gutted. My own family suspicion had spilled into the streets. Years of respect I had built in this town were crumbling in days. And the worst part? I knew exactly whose hand was stirring the pot, Derek's. But Derek wasn't the only one. Even Greg, my eldest, began to distance himself. He stopped bringing the kids around, said they were busy with school. I knew better. He didn't want them near me until the air cleared. I called him one evening, desperate to hear a friendly voice. "Greg, son, I didn't do this. You know me. You know your old man." There was a pause on the line, too long, too heavy. Then his reply, "I want to believe that, Dad. I really do. But it just looks bad." His words crushed me more than any accusation from the police ever could. My own son wanted to believe, but he couldn't. The doubt had already poisoned him, just like that wine glass. Even my grandchildren began to feel the ripple. Little Emma asked me on the phone, "Grandpa, did you hurt Daddy?" My throat closed, and tears pricked my eyes. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. Grandpa would never hurt anyone. She believed me. Children always believe in the people they love, but the fact she had to ask shattered something inside me. I hung up the phone and sat in the dark, staring at the framed photo of Elaine on the mantel. "I'm losing them, Elaine," I whispered. "They're slipping away from me, and I don't know how to stop it." Her smile in the picture offered no answers, only the memory of her steady faith in me. But faith felt thin against the tide of betrayal I was drowning in. The pattern of disrespect deepened. At the grocery store, Meredith brushed past me like I was a stranger. At the hospital, when I brought flowers for Derek, she refused to take them. "We don't need anything from you," she snapped. Derek sat in the bed, smirking, watching me with the smugness of a man who thought he had already won. "Maybe you should just rest at home, Walter," he said, voice dripping with false concern. "You're not as sharp as you used to be. These things happen when folks get older." His words cut deep, but I stayed silent. I set the flowers on the counter and left without a word. That was my curse. Silence. Decades of swallowing my pride, biting my tongue, putting others first. But that night, as I lay awake, I realized silence had gotten me here, suspected, isolated, humiliated. Silence had cost me my family. It wasn't just their words, it was their absence. Days turned into weeks with no visits. I ate alone, walked alone, lived alone. The phone only rang when the police wanted another statement. My children had abandoned me, their loyalty chained to Derek's poison story. And yet, even in their cruelty, I kept giving. I paid Meredith's mortgage when she fell behind, quietly sending the check without signing my name. I covered Greg's car repairs, slipping money into his account under the guise of bank error. They never knew. They never thanked me. But I couldn't stop myself. I had spent my entire life providing, sacrificing, giving even when I had nothing left. It was who I was. Or at least it had been. Because now, for the first time, I began to wonder if my endless giving had turned me into their doormat. And I began to feel something dangerous stirring inside me, anger. One night, sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, I let that anger bloom. I replayed every slight, every suspicion, every look of doubt in my children's eyes. Derek's smirk haunted me most of all. I realized then that this wasn't just about poisoned wine. This was about power. Derek had wormed his way into my daughter's heart, poisoned her loyalty, and now he was poisoning the rest of the family against me. He wanted me isolated, weak, out of the way. And the worst part? He was winning. But I also realized something else, something that made my pulse quicken. I still had cards to play. Cards no one knew I held. And if Derek thought I'd let him destroy everything I built, he was about to learn a painful lesson. I pushed back my chair and stood tall, taller than I had in weeks. The anger in my chest turned into steel in my spine. For 70 years I had been everyone's rock, everyone's servant, everyone's safety net. But that night I made myself a promise. No more. No more silence. No more bending. No more giving without respect. Derek wanted to make me the villain in his story. Fine. Let him. Because the truth was, I had been holding back for too long. And when I finally showed them who I really was, what I really had, they would regret every cruel word, every doubt, every. The promise I made to myself that night wasn't just idle talk. It was a turning point, a shift from silence to something sharper, harder. For decades, my family had seen me as dependable Walter, the quiet man who worked, paid the bills, and sacrificed without complaint. They never once asked what it had cost me, or what I might have kept for myself. That suited me fine. I never volunteered the truth. But now, as Derek spread his poison through whispers and smirks, I realized their ignorance was my only advantage. They thought I was weak, broke, and fading. The truth was far different. I had built my life on quiet strength, and I had never been as powerless as they believed. I decided it was time to peel back the curtain, carefully, selectively. And the first person I'd reveal it to would not be family, but someone who still treated me like a man worth listening to. That someone was Mr. Whitaker, my old lawyer. He had been with me since my 30s, back when Elaine and I first bought the house in Willow Creek. A sharp-eyed man with a hawk's nose and a memory like iron, Whitaker knew more about my affairs than anyone else alive. I made an appointment under the pretense of updating my will. He greeted me with his usual firm handshake, his eyes narrowing just slightly as he took in the tension in my face. "Walter," he said, "you don't come around unless something's weighing heavy. What's on your mind?" I sat across from him, leaning forward, lowering my voice. "It's my family," I admitted. "They think I'm nothing. They think I'm finished. But I'm not. And I need to prepare for what's coming." Whitaker listened, silent, his pen tapping against his legal pad. When I told him about Derek, about the poisoning, his brow furrowed. "Sounds like you've got a snake in the grass," he muttered. "Question is, do you plan to cut its head off, or let it coil tighter?" The meeting stretched into hours. I laid out my accounts, investments, properties, assets my children had no idea existed. Years ago, when Elaine passed, I had diversified, quietly buying farmland, investing in oil stocks, even purchasing a rental property under a trust. On paper, I looked like a pensioner scraping by. In reality, I had a small fortune hidden in plain sight. Whitaker helped me tighten the locks, trusts that couldn't be touched, clauses that would trigger if anyone tried to declare me unfit, protections that ensured Derek's greedy fingers would never close around what I built. "You've been underestimated," Whitaker said at the end, sliding the papers into a thick folder. "That's good. Keep it that way. But don't wait too long to reveal what you want them to see. Timing, Walter, that's everything." His words stayed with me as I drove home, the autumn leaves swirling in the wind like whispers of Elaine's old counsel. Timing, indeed. The very next day, I tested the waters. I invited Greg to lunch at a small diner out of town, a place where gossip didn't travel as fast. He came reluctantly, his eyes darting toward the door as if afraid Derek or Meredith might appear. Over coffee, I spoke plainly. "Son, I know you have doubts about me, but I want you to remember who I am. I've never hurt this family. Never." He stirred his drink, avoiding my gaze. "It's hard, Dad. Everyone's saying, I cut him off. Forget what they're saying. Look at what you know. Who paid for your college? Who bought your first car when you couldn't? Who fixed your roof last year?" My words hung heavy, sharper than he expected. He swallowed hard, finally meeting my eyes. "You did," he admitted. "Always you. That was my opening." I leaned in closer. "And if you stay blind to Derek's poison, you're going to lose me. And when you lose me, you'll lose more than you realize." His brow furrowed. He didn't press further, but I saw the flicker of fear in his eyes, the first crack in the wall Derek had built. But not all cracks could be opened with words. Some required demonstration. That weekend, I attended church as usual, but this time I didn't sit in the back pew. I took my place at the front, dropped a donation check into the basket so large the ushers stammered their thanks. Word spread before the service even ended. Eyes turned toward me, whispers buzzing like bees. By Monday, the gossip mill was confused. Was Walter poor and bitter, or was he quietly wealthy and generous? Derek had pushed the first story, but I had planted a seed of doubt. In a small town, reputation was currency, and I had just purchased some back. The look on Derek's face when Meredith told him would have been worth gold. I knew because Meredith called me that evening, her tone softer than it had been in weeks. "Dad," she said cautiously, "the pastor mentioned your gift. That was unexpected." I kept my voice even. "Sometimes people need reminding, Meredith. That's all." She didn't reply, but I could hear her thinking. Still, Derek wasn't a fool. He sensed the shift, and he didn't like it. A few days later, he cornered me outside the grocery store, his smile tight and venomous. "Playing games, old man," he hissed under his breath. "Flashing money around like some hero? It won't change what people think." I looked him square in the eye, my voice steady as stone. "You're right, Derek. It won't change what they think. But it might change what they know." His jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw unease flicker behind his arrogance. He wanted control, wanted me weak, dependent, irrelevant. But I had just shown him that I could shift the ground under his feet with a single gesture. He muttered something I didn't catch and stormed off. I stood there for a moment, calm, steady, unshaken. The tide was turning, slowly but surely. But I knew this was only the beginning of a much larger war. Meanwhile, my nights grew restless. I would sit at the kitchen table with old photo albums spread out, Elaine's smile frozen in time beside the children's younger faces. I whispered to her, as though she were across from me, sipping her tea. "I think I'm scaring them, Elaine. Maybe that's good. Maybe it's time they feared losing me." The silence of the house answered back, but in my heart, I felt her approval. She had always urged me to be firmer, less yielding. Perhaps, even from beyond, she was urging me still. And so, I began to plan, not just defense, but offense. Derek wanted me isolated. Fine. I would show him isolation. I would cut him off from every benefit of my presence until he was left with nothing but his own hollow schemes. And when the truth came out, because I would make sure it did, it would bury him deeper than any poisoned wine ever could. The plan began small. I stopped paying Meredith's bills. The mortgage notice would come due soon enough, and she would wonder why. I stopped slipping money into Greg's account, let his car repairs pile up. I stopped answering the phone every time one of them called late, demanding some quiet assistance. Instead, I waited. And sure enough, the panic began. Greg called 3 times in one night. Meredith left messages with a strain in her voice, a crack in her confidence. Derek stayed silent. He was watching, calculating, waiting to see my next move. And that silence told me everything. He knew I had more cards to play, and he didn't know which one would fall next. That uncertainty was my weapon now. For once, I was no longer the hunted, I was the hunter. Yet even hunters can't operate alone. One evening, Whitaker stopped by unannounced, bringing with him a sealed envelope. "Walter," he said quietly, "I've done as you asked. Everything is in place. If anything happens to you, Derek gets nothing. Your children only get what you specify. The rest, well, let's just say it will speak louder than you ever could." I opened the envelope, scanning the legal clauses, the signatures, the ironclad protections. Relief mingled with resolve in my chest. I wasn't just fighting back with words anymore. I was fortifying a legacy that Derek could never touch. As Whitaker left, he clasped my shoulder. "Be careful, Walter. Snakes bite hardest when they're cornered." His warning rang in my ears long after the door closed. That night, as I looked out the window at the darkened street, I realized the battle had shifted. I was no longer reacting to Derek's venom, I was anticipating it. No longer swallowing humiliation, I was feeding it back to him in doses he didn't expect. My silence was gone, replaced by action. My family's doubts still stung, but I had stopped begging for their belief. They would see the truth in time, whether they wanted to or not. And when they did, they would understand that Walter Harding was never the weak, fading man Derek painted him to be. I was the architect of their lives, th. The weeks that followed felt like the slow tightening of a noose, though not around my neck, around Derek's. My silence was gone, replaced with deliberate action, and every move I made shifted the balance a little further from him. Meredith and Greg didn't see it yet, but they were beginning to feel it. The money that once flowed into their lives like air was gone. Bills piled up, car repairs went unfixed, and the little conveniences they had taken for granted began to vanish. I had always been their invisible safety net, the cushion they never acknowledged, but now that it was gone, the ground beneath them grew harder by the day. The cracks were forming, and Derek could do nothing but watch as the illusion he had built began to fracture. Meredith came to my house one morning, her face pale, her tone brittle. "Dad," she began, standing in the doorway like a stranger, "the bank called about the mortgage. Did you forget?" I let the silence stretch before answering. "No, Meredith. I didn't forget." Her eyes flickered, confusion battling pride. She tried again. "It's just, you've always helped before." I nodded slowly, my voice calm. "And what did that get me? Suspicions. Whispers. Being treated like a criminal in my own family." She flinched at the words, and for the first time, I saw doubt in her expression, doubt not in me, but in Derek. She didn't argue. She left without another word, but her silence told me everything. The foundation of her loyalty was beginning to crack. Greg followed a few days later, though less confrontational. He called late at night, his voice subdued, almost embarrassed. "Dad, the mechanic says it's going to cost more than I've got." He stopped himself, as though catching the old habit of asking before it slipped out. I didn't rescue him. I let the weight hang there. "I can't help you this time, son," I said finally. "You'll have to figure it out." There was a pause, a long exhale, and then a quiet, "All right, Dad. I understand." But I could hear the resentment in his tone, resentment not aimed at me, but at the hole Derek had dug between us. Derek had promised him security through Meredith, through influence. Now, that promise rang hollow. Meanwhile, Derek was unraveling in small but telling ways. At church, his smirk had dulled. The whispers no longer worked solely in his favor. People who had once pitied him now glanced at him with skepticism, their eyes shifting back toward me with curiosity. At the hardware store, I overheard someone mutter, "Funny how Derek's always got drama around him." Reputation in Willow Creek was fragile, and Derek's grip was slipping. He knew it, too. He cornered me again in the grocery store parking lot, his voice low but venomous. "You think starving them of your scraps makes you look strong? All it does is remind them you're petty and bitter." I didn't rise to his bait. Instead, I leaned closer, my voice calm as ice. "No, Derek. It reminds them who's been carrying them all along. And when the truth comes out, it won't be me they see as petty, it'll be you." His jaw clenched, and for once, he had no clever retort. He walked away stiffly, his confidence cracking. But I knew this game wasn't just about withholding. It was about timing. Whitaker's voice echoed in my mind. Timing is everything. I couldn't reveal my hand all at once. I had to let them sweat, let them wonder. And so, I began to plant seeds, small reminders of who I really was. A quiet donation to the local school, with my name attached this time. A sponsorship of the town fair. Each gesture whispered the same message. Walter Harding was not fading, not broken, not the man Derek wanted them to believe. He was present, capable, generous, but on his own terms. Slowly, the town's eyes shifted. And with that shift, Derek's narrative began to erode. One evening, Meredith returned, this time with Derek at her side. They stood on my porch, Derek's smile tight, Meredith's eyes pleading. "Dad," she said softly, "maybe we could talk, as a family." I studied them, the contrast between her desperation and his arrogance. I invited them in, but kept the conversation sharp. Meredith spoke of unity, of misunderstandings, while Derek let her do the talking, his smirk betraying his belief that he still had the upper hand. When she finally paused, I looked at them both. Family doesn't accuse without proof. Family doesn't let outsiders poison their minds. You chose your side when you believed him over me. Meredith's eyes filled with tears, but Derek scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "You're playing games, Walter. You've always been a lonely old man clinging to whatever scraps of dignity you think you have left. You can't change that." His words burned, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I let a small smile play at the corner of my lips. "We'll see, Derek. We'll see." After they left, I sat in the quiet, my chest heavy but steady. Meredith was torn. Her heart tugged in two directions, loyalty to her father against loyalty to her husband. Greg was restless, caught between doubt and duty. The grandchildren, though distant, still called me with innocence that Derek couldn't corrupt. The battle lines were drawn, but the cracks in the family's foundation were spreading, widening with each passing day. Derek thought he could hold them together with fear and lies, but fear only worked when there was no alternative. And I was becoming that alternative again. Whitaker visited once more, this time with a small leather-bound book. "Walter," he said, "you've got stories in you, proof of who you are, what you've done for them. Write it down. Don't wait until you're gone for them to learn the truth." I turned the book over in my hands, the blank pages waiting like a challenge. That night, I began writing, not just about money or property, but about the sacrifices Elaine and I had made, the countless unseen acts that had built my children's lives. It wasn't revenge, it was a record. A weapon, if needed. And as I wrote, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, control. But control doesn't come without risk. Derek, sensing his grip slipping, began pushing harder. I heard from neighbors that he was spreading new rumors, that I was senile, that Whitaker was exploiting me, that I was parading my money around to buy sympathy. Lies, yes, but lies can stick. I knew it was only a matter of time before Derek made his next desperate move. And so, I prepared. Quietly, deliberately, with the patience of a man who had weathered storms before. As I closed the book one late night, Elaine's picture smiling back at me, I whispered, "It's starting, love. The cracks are widening." E.T. The breaking point came sooner than I expected. It was a chilly Sunday morning, the kind where frost clung stubbornly to the grass and the church bells cut through the silence like a knife. I had just returned from service, easing myself into the old armchair by the window, when headlights swept across the driveway. Derek's truck. My chest tightened. He didn't bother knocking. He stormed inside like he owned the place. Meredith trailed behind him, pale and shaken, her eyes darting like a trapped bird. Derek's face was twisted, his usual smirk replaced by a mask of rage. "Enough games, Walter," he snapped. "You think you can make me look like a fool in this town? You think tossing money around erases what you've done?" His words were venom, but behind the bluster I saw fear. His grip was loosening, and he knew it. I didn't rise to meet his fury. Instead, I stayed seated, calm, deliberate. "What I've done?" I asked quietly. "Or what you've told them I've done?" Meredith flinched as though struck. Derek pressed on, louder now, as though volume could mask the cracks in his confidence. "They all see it, Walter. You're slipping. Senile. Unstable. Everyone knows it's just a matter of time before you can't take care of yourself." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. "When that happens, I'll be the one calling the shots. Not you." His arrogance was the same as always, but the desperation behind it rang louder than his words. Meredith tried to speak, her voice trembling. "Derek, maybe we should—" He cut her off with a sharp glance. "Quiet. This is between me and him." The look in her eyes nearly broke me. She wasn't blind anymore. She saw Derek for who he was, but fear still chained her tongue. That fear was what Derek thrived on. He wanted me weak, helpless, a man begging for scraps of respect. But he was about to learn that his grip on this family was built on sand. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for the leather-bound book Whitaker had given me. I set it on the table between us, the sound echoing like a gavel. Derek frowned, confusion flickering in his eyes. "This," I said, tapping the cover, "is the story of my life. Every sacrifice. Every choice. Every dollar I ever poured into this family. It's a record that proves exactly who I am, and who I'm not." I looked directly at him. "You've spent months trying to paint me as weak. But this," I slid the book toward Meredith, "is the truth. And the truth doesn't fear your lies." She picked it up with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the pages, tears welling as she read the sacrifices she had long forgotten. Derek tried to snatch it from her, but I stopped him with a look so sharp it froze him in place. For the first time in years, he hesitated. Rage flickered across his face. "You think a few scribbles in a notebook change anything? They don't. The town still sees you as a bitter old man clinging to control." His voice rose, echoing in the quiet house. "But I'm the future. I've got Meredith. I've got Greg's ear. You're nothing without us." He spat the words like a curse. I leaned forward, my voice calm but thunderous in its certainty. "No, Derek. You're nothing without me. Without the foundation I built, without the money I poured into this family, without the reputation I carved over decades, you're just a parasite feeding on scraps. And the scraps are gone." Meredith's sob broke the silence. "Derek, stop." Her voice trembled, but there was steel beneath it now. Derek turned to her, his face pale. "He's manipulating you," he snarled. But her eyes didn't waver. "No," she whispered. "You are." It was the first time I'd heard her push back, the first time Derek's grip slipped before my very eyes. The realization hit him like a blow. He spun back toward me, his face contorted with fury. "You'll regret this," he spat. "You think you've won, but I'll bury you." He stormed toward the door, Meredith lingering only a moment before following, the leather-bound book still clutched tightly to her chest. The house fell silent after the door slammed, but the air buzzed with the weight of what had just unfolded. Derek had crossed the line, his threats no longer whispers in the shadows but declarations in the light. And in that moment, I knew the confrontation wasn't just between me and him anymore. Meredith had seen the truth. The cracks in Derek's armor were now fractures, and the rest of the family would soon follow. I exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and anticipation flooding my chest. The time for silence was over. The next day, word spread like wildfire. Neighbors approached me cautiously at the post office, their voices hushed but curious. "We heard there was a scene at your house." I didn't confirm or deny. I let their imaginations do the work. In a town like Willow Creek, perception was everything, and Derek had just painted himself as a man out of control. Meanwhile, Meredith visited again, alone this time. She set the book on the table, her hands trembling. "Dad," she whispered, "why didn't you tell us? All those years, all those sacrifices." Her tears fell freely now, no longer restrained. I placed my hand over hers, steady and firm. "Because love doesn't keep score, Meredith. But lies do. And Derek's lies nearly destroyed us." Her face crumpled with shame. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted. I squeezed her hand gently. "You already started, by seeing him for who he is. The rest will come." She nodded, her shoulders shaking, and for the first time in years, I saw my daughter again. Not Derek's echo, but Elaine's child, my child. It was a glimmer of hope, fragile but real. Derek had thought this confrontation would break me. Instead, it had broken his grip. The tides had turned, and he didn't even see how badly he had exposed himself. As I watched Meredith leave that afternoon, sunlight catching in her hair the way it once had when she was little, I felt Elaine's presence again, quiet, steady, proud. This was only the beginning. Derek wasn't finished, but neither was I. And for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly how this story would end. I straightened the papers on the table, my voice barely above a whisper as I spoke into the empty room. The reckoning is coming. And Derek has no idea how much it will cost him. Sunday mornings in Willow Creek had always carried a certain reverence. Families dressed in their best, children tugging on sleeves, the smell of fresh-baked bread drifting from kitchens as the bells called us to the little white church on the hill. That morning, though, the air felt different, charged, heavy, expectant. I knew why. Word of Derek's outburst had spread far beyond our walls, carried on whispers and sideways glances. And now, the whole town was watching, waiting. Derek, never one to retreat, arrived with Meredith at his side, Greg trailing just behind. He strode up the church steps with his usual swagger, but the forced smile plastered on his face didn't reach his eyes. I sat in my usual pew near the front, cane resting against the wood, heart steady. This was no longer a private war. This was a reckoning. Pastor Lee gave his sermon on truth and false witness, his voice echoing with unusual weight. I caught the flickers of discomfort on Derek's face, his jaw tightening, his gaze darting toward me. It wasn't coincidence. The pastor had heard the whispers too. Around us, the congregation murmured softly, exchanging glances. Every word about deceit, every passage about wolves in sheep's clothing seemed to hang in the air heavier than Scripture alone. Meredith sat stiff as stone, her hands folded too tightly in her lap. When the service ended, the usual warmth of fellowship was absent. Conversations paused as Derek passed. Eyes lingered too long. Smiles faltered. For the first time, he wasn't the charming son-in-law but the subject of suspicion. It didn't take long for the first spark to catch. At the church steps, Mrs. Reynolds, who never missed an opportunity for gossip, asked in a too loud voice, "Meredith, dear, I heard there was quite the scene at your father's house last week. Is everything all right?" Her words sliced the air cleanly, and all around us, ears strained for the reply. Meredith faltered, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. Derek jumped in before she could speak. "Everything's fine," he snapped, forcing a laugh. "Just a family matter. You know how rumors fly." But the damage was done. People saw the fear in Meredith's eyes, the anger in his voice. Rumors don't die in towns like ours. They feed, they grow. By the following week, Derek was floundering. At the hardware store, I overheard two men muttering about his temper. At the diner, Heads turned when he walked in. The story of his shouting match at my house had grown legs, and each retelling painted him darker. "Did you hear he threatened the old man?" one whispered. "I heard he threw something," another replied. The truth didn't matter anymore. Perception had taken root. Derek was unraveling publicly, and the harder he tried to grip the narrative, the faster it slipped through his fingers. He doubled down, strutting louder, talking bigger, as if bluster could drown out the whispers. But people weren't fooled anymore. They had seen the mask crack. It all came to a head at the church's autumn fundraiser, the social event of the season. The hall was strung with golden leaves and twinkling lights, the smell of cider and roasted meat filling the air. Neighbors mingled, laughter ringing out as pies were auctioned and children played near the stage. Derek, desperate to reclaim his standing, volunteered to speak on behalf of the family, painting himself as the devoted son-in-law who cared for his aging father. His words dripped with honey, but the crowd's polite smiles were brittle, their eyes skeptical. And then, blessed Providence, young Jacob Whittaker, no older than 16, raised his voice. "If you care so much, Mr. Derek, why'd my dad say you yelled at Mr. Walter and threatened him?" The silence was absolute. Derek's face went pale, then red. He stammered, tried to laugh it off. "Kids overhear things, twist them around," he muttered. But the room was no longer with him. Murmurs swelled, eyes narrowed. Pastor Lee stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Walter has always been a pillar of this community," he said gently but firmly. "If there's truth to these stories, then we must not turn a blind eye." His words carried the weight of authority, and Derek knew it. He lashed out, his voice rising. "This is ridiculous. You're all taking the word of a bitter old man over me? He's losing his mind, can't you see? He's not fit to—" He stopped abruptly, realizing too late the venom spilling from his mouth. But the damage was irreversible. Gasps rippled through the crowd, shock etched on familiar faces. To attack me so publicly, to dismiss me as senile and unfit, it was the final nail in his coffin. Meredith's face crumpled, tears streaming silently. Greg stood frozen, shame washing over him. And I, calm, steady, resolute, rose from my chair with the help of my cane. The hall fell silent as I spoke, my voice low but unwavering. "You've all known me for decades. You've seen me work these lands, raise my family, bury my wife. I may be old, but my mind is clear. And the man you just heard is not a son-in-law protecting his family. He is a man terrified of losing control." Applause broke out then, not loud at first, but steady, growing, until the hall echoed with it. Derek's face twisted in fury, but there was no saving him now. The tide had turned fully. He stormed out of the hall, Meredith chasing after him, Greg lingering in shame. I sank back into my chair, the noise of the crowd a balm to my weary heart. The public reckoning had begun, and Derek had done most of the work himself. All I had needed to do was stand firm and let the truth speak louder than his lies. In the days that followed, the whispers turned into declarations. "Derek's not what we thought. Walter was right all along." The tide of opinion shifted completely, and I saw it in the way people greeted me on the street, with respect, with warmth, with the quiet acknowledgment that they had been wrong to doubt. Derek, meanwhile, grew more frantic. He barked at neighbors, alienated friends, and even Meredith began to avoid his touch in public. The unraveling wasn't just public, it was personal. His own home had become a battlefield. And though the fight wasn't finished, the victory was no longer in doubt. The truth had found its voice. And yet, even in triumph, I knew better than to rest easy. A cornered animal is most dangerous when it knows the end is near. Derek wouldn't go quietly. His pride wouldn't allow it. The question wasn't whether he'd strike again, it was how and when. I sat on the porch one evening, Kane resting by my side, the sunset bleeding crimson across the sky. For the first time in years, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Whatever came next, I was ready. The town stood with me now, the truth was out, and Derek's lies were crumbling. But one final confrontation still loomed, the kind that would decide not just my legacy, but the future of my family. The day of reckoning did not announce itself with thunder or fanfare. It came quietly, like a storm gathering beyond the horizon, inevitable and unrelenting. Willow Creek was alive with whispers that morning. At the diner, I overheard Conversations pause when I walked in, eyes darting toward me with a mix of curiosity and awe. Derek's tirade at my house had traveled faster than wildfire. The image of him storming out, veins bulging, Meredith clutching that leather-bound book, it was the sort of spectacle a small town never forgot. The court of public opinion had shifted, and Derek's stranglehold on appearances was broken. I felt no triumph in that, only clarity. The time had come to end this battle, not with fists or venom, but with truth. I had invited the family to my house that evening. Not to plead, not to fight, but to reveal. The dining room table was set, not with food, but with documents, photographs, ledgers, every piece of the life I had built and the sacrifices Elaine and I had made. When Meredith arrived first, her eyes carried both fear and determination. She placed the book on the table, a silent gesture of alliance. Greg came next, skeptical, his lawyer's instincts bristling. But when his eyes fell on the neat stacks of evidence, I saw curiosity spark beneath the shield of suspicion. Finally, Derek entered. His arrogance was intact, but the edges were frayed. He carried himself like a man fighting to keep a mask from slipping. The silence was thick as I began. "This isn't about control," I said, my voice steady. "It's about truth. You've been told lies about me, about my mind, my worth, my place in this family. Tonight, you will see for yourselves what those lies tried to bury." I handed Meredith a photo of Elaine holding her as a baby, our young family framed in sunlight. Then a ledger showing the money I had poured into Greg's education, into Derek's failed business ventures, into the very roof over their heads. One by one, I laid out the sacrifices, not as weapons but as markers of love. Each page turned was a nail in the coffin of Derek's narrative. Greg leaned back, silent, his fingers drumming on the table as the weight of it sank in. Meredith wept openly, clutching the photo like a lifeline. Derek, however, grew restless. He scoffed, trying to dismiss it all as manipulation. "Old man tricks. You're just trying to turn them against me." But his words no longer had gravity. His voice, once commanding, now sounded hollow, like a bluff called too many times. The shift was visible. The family no longer looked at me with doubt. They looked at him. And what they saw was a parasite clinging to power. The breaking blow came not from me, but from Meredith. Her voice, trembling but firm, cut through Derek's protests. "No more lies, Derek. I've lived in your shadow long enough. Dad was right. You've been feeding off him, off all of us. And I'm done." Her words shattered whatever fragile grip Derek had left. His face twisted with rage, but there was no fight left in the room. Greg, always the pragmatist, leaned forward and spoke for the first time. "You've destroyed your credibility, Derek. Whatever influence you thought you had, it's gone. If you care about this family, you'll walk away now." For the first time, Derek looked small. His bluster collapsed into silence, his shoulders sagging as the reality hit him. He had lost, not in secret, not behind closed doors, but in the full light of his family's eyes. He muttered something under his breath, incoherent, then stormed out once more, this time with no promises of return. The slam of the door echoed like the final toll of a bell. In its wake, the house felt lighter, as though a storm had passed and left only clear skies. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of years pressing down. Finally, Meredith reached across the table, taking my hand. Greg followed, hesitant but sincere. In that small gesture, I felt Elaine's presence again, binding us together. The reckoning had come, not with vengeance, but with truth. And truth had set us free. That night, after they left, I sat alone by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the fields. For the first time in years, the quiet felt like peace rather than exile. I thought of Elaine, of the promises we had made to protect our family, to endure. I whispered into the night, "We did it, my love. They finally see." And in the stillness, I could almost hear her answer, a soft echo carried by the wind. The battle was over. Derek was gone, stripped of his illusions. Meredith and Greg had begun to find their way back. And me, I was no longer just the old man they pitied or dismissed. I was the father, the builder, the man who had weathered storms and kept the flame alive. My reckoning had not been defeat, It had been vindication. In Willow Creek, stories became legend quickly. By the week's end, the tale of the poisoned birthday drink, the stormy confrontation, and the final reckoning had woven itself into the fabric of the town. But beyond the whispers and the nods of respect, the only legacy I cared about sat within my family's eyes. They had seen the truth. They had remembered who I was. And that was enough. The reckoning had ended one chapter, but it opened another, one of healing, rebuilding, and quiet dignity. I wasn't naive. Scars would remain. But scars are proof of survival, and survival is a kind of victory. As dawn broke the next morning, I stepped onto the porch, breathed in the crisp air, and felt, for the first time in a long while, the simple grace of freedom. The sun rose, warm and unwavering. So did I. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.